Hi, I'm Daniel from Image Salon, and this is Editing Deconstructed. Every week we take a different image and show you some behind the scenes in Lightroom and Photoshop to get the best out of your editing. In this week's video, we decided to do things a little bit differently. We're going to be editing a bunch of photos in Lightroom using DVLOP presets. In case you're not familiar with DVLOP, they are a preset maker that has teamed up with different photographers all around the world with different styles. And you get to use the presets that they would normally be using. It's very cool. One thing that's important to note is that presets are really meant to be a starting point. It should never be the final settings for your image. It just puts things in the right direction, and from there we make further adjustments to really bring the images to where we want them. So Davina and I have our own set of presets on DVLOP, which are available to purchase on their website. And our presets are as follows. So El Viejo, Hyder, Coracia, Marfa, Pero, and our black and white preset, which is Saint Henry. And throughout all of these images, you'll see us use all of these presets. All of these images are personal images that we've been taking over the last few weeks and months. And we're going to be editing about 25 of them here in Lightroom. So here on this photo of our daughter, Charlie, we use the Pero preset, which is a great neutral indoor preset. Really gets things in the right direction. And that's what we've applied. We've added some warmth and a little bit of brighter exposure from the original. And now we're just cropping to get the right balance going. The preset also comes with different brush presets that we like to use. So here we're going to change it to our D&D Dodge brush. And what that does is pull contrast, push shadows, basically brightens our dark areas a little bit without really affecting the highlights. So it's a really great tool for sloppy brushing if we want to lighten up the face, but really not brighten up any of the highlights that appear in the face. So once we've added a little bit of exposure on her face, we're going to make any kind of small final tweaks, just using the spot healing to remove any sensor dust, or that might be on the wall in the background, not quite sure. Once everything looks good, we're going to go ahead and copy our settings. So we're going to copy everything except for exposure, white balance, local adjustments, transform, crop, and spot removal. Those settings that we're unchecking, they are specific to each image, so we don't want to paste them on the next photo. Everything else though, it was looking good, so we can copy all of our settings. We're going to play around with the exposure here and then brush in Charlie. And give a little more clarity, which is going to define the edges a little bit further, add a little bit of dehaze. I like how things are dramatic on our Sun Max on the right side, but we definitely need a little bit more light on the left side for Charlie. She's the main subject. We want the most light on her, but we want to keep everything else dark. And so keeping the overall exposure darker and then using a good Dodge brush is really what's going to make this image pop and stand out. Make final adjustments to our exposure. And pull our blacks down for a little bit of added contrast. Pull our vibrance down ever so slightly to -5. Or actually maybe a little bit more here. Let's play around. We'll leave it at 0. The colors are adding, so we'll keep that. Maybe just desaturate our oranges a little further so Charlie isn't quite so colored. Adding a bit of luminance as well, which lightens the yellows and oranges, makes them a little less intense. Good. Next image, paste our settings so everything stays very similar to the previous image. We're going to adjust our exposure and white balance in a second. And let's go ahead and crop the image. So again, really looking for the balance here. I want to make sure that the little girl on the left side is on 1/3, and also that the space on the right side between the pink dress and the edge of the frame is sort of equal to the pink car on the left. That's where we're really going to get that nice visual balance. Same with the bike in the middle there and the bottom of the frame. That space is going to be equal as well. We're going to lower our exposure overall and start dodging our subjects. Give it a little more contrast. Things were quite flat on this day. Things were cloudy, so a little more contrast helps. All right, repaste our settings. I think this image is probably going to look better in black and white. The colors are cool, but it's just, the moment is just much better in black and white. Let's go ahead and apply our St. Henry preset. We'll lower the exposure. What I'm really looking at here is the highlights in the arms and the bike. Get that down. And then we're going to use a radial filter with our D&D dodge. So it's set to the outside of the filter. So everything inside stays as it was, and everything outside of the radial brush is going to get adjusted. So I'm using the D&D dodge, but I'm also making the exposure a little bit brighter, both on the radial blur and on the overall settings. And then fill in a little bit more exposure with another D&D dodge. Using the brush this time on Charlie in the back. She's the one in focus, she's the main subject, so we want a little more exposure on her. Next, we're outside. We're going to paste our settings, which are still the Paro preset. Adjust our white balance, go a little bit warmer, a little bit brighter. Not a ton of adjustments needed here. We're going to straighten it. Let's go ahead and give it more exposure. Pull our highlights. Pull our blacks for a little added contrast. And dodge our sun max in the middle there. Dodge a bit of the street so things look nice and natural. It's nice and detailed. Again, go back and give it a little more contrast, and we're good. All right, now we have an evening image. So the Paro settings work, but it's a little, maybe not enough on contrast and pushing the colors. So let's switch to a different preset. We're going to use El Viejo, which is really meant for darker images with a lot more color. Then we pull our exposure, adjust our white balance to really give it a nice blue sky. Get the pinks and greens under control as well. Give it a lot more contrast. Pull our highlights down. And then I'm pulling the luminance down on the blues to get even deeper blues. And then taking the dodge brush to bring Max out in his Spider-Man costume in the foreground. He's out of focus, so we don't need him to be super bright, just really nicely balanced with everything else. All right. Similar image, we're going to copy our settings from the previous one, including the white balance and exposure. This time it's going to be the same settings or very close. So once we paste those, we're really in the right ballpark. So we only need to make little adjustments from there on. We're going to push our shadows a little bit more, lift our blacks to recuperate some of the details in the buildings. And then dodge brush our buildings as well to retain a little bit more detail from them. These edits in Lightroom, the idea is to do as much as possible in about a minute or two. We definitely don't want things to be quite as perfect as the way we do them in Photoshop layers. We want images that are going to be good, probably not perfect, but definitely good enough to keep and print from there on. We're back inside, so we're going to use the Paro preset, which is our standard indoor, but let's see what the other ones look like. Karakia has quite nice tones here as well. Hider maybe a little too much contrast. And El Viejo too. Let's go back. Karakia, Marfa, a little too strong. And I have a feeling we're going to settle on the Karakia preset. That's the one that was giving us the best colors. Or was it Hider? Nope. Hider is a little too strong. My apologies. Let's go back to Karakia. All right, so once we're here, let's go ahead and make adjustments. We're going to pull the blacks to get a little more contrast, adjust our exposure, and adjust our white balance. Really fine-tuning our adjustments. There's a lot of back and forth when we edit in Lightroom. It's important to give it more contrast, less contrast, really move the sliders around and see what works. All right, let's go to the next image, and it's quite dark. Let's start by pasting our settings just to see what that looks like. But this image for sure is going to require us to use slightly different settings. The phone is going to react nicely to the highlight sliders, and everything in the shade, well, obviously it's going to react to the shadows and black slider. So let's go ahead and apply our Pero preset, which is the most standard one. See, we're going to pull the highlights and then push up our exposure, which will make everything bright. Bring our black details back, push our shadows, and make final adjustments to our highlights and shadows. Looking good. Here we can just hit previous settings, which will apply all of the same settings. There is no brushing, no cropping, no spot removal, so it doesn't matter if some of those settings copy over as well, since they're all at 0. So once the settings are in the right ballpark, let's go ahead and adjust the temperature, the tint, a little adjustment to the exposure as well. Copy our settings, go to the next image, we'll paste. A little too much shadow detail, a little too bright, so let's bring those things back. Give it a little bit more warmth, which we were losing in the image. When dealing with tungsten light, it's definitely micro adjustments that make a big difference. An adjustment of 100 or 200 kelvins can really make a big difference. Then let's go ahead and use the D&D Dodge brush on Max and Davina. And lastly, let's do an auto upright adjustment to straighten the architectural lines in the background. That did work, but not quite perfectly, so we're going to switch to a guided upright. So I'm tracing the lines that should be straight, and Lightroom is going to take care of the rest. So all you need to do is trace 2 horizontals, 2 verticals that you know are supposed to be straight, and Lightroom takes care of the rest. Final little adjustments to the exposure, and we're good to go. All right, we're in a very different setting. We're indoors, so let's go ahead and maybe reset the preset that we're using instead of pasting our settings. Once again, Karaki is going to do a nice job, just a little more contrast than the standard Para one. Once that's applied, adjust the exposure, contrast. Get a little bit more warmth going. Let's go ahead and crop the parts of the wall that are still visible. I'll remove that, crop from the bottom as well. And then just figure out where we need to place Charlie. Obviously centering her in the frame would be ideal, but that's going to require us to crop quite a bit. Or what we can do is put her on one of the thirds, or as close as possible. There we go, perfect. Then we will go ahead and take our D&D Dodge brush and pass it on Charlie's face and on her arms and her dress to make sure that we get nice light on her. So as you can see, it wasn't there in the original. I mean, the light is there in the original, but it's just underexposed, and we want to bring that out in our editing. All right, very similar image, so we're going to copy all of our settings, paste them here. So it really puts things in the really close to where we want them. I'm just going to crop out the wall And here we should be able to center her. She's a little better placed in the frame and we have a little more room to play with in the background. And we can cheat ever so slightly, even if her face is not perfectly centered. Her arms take up a lot of space as well, so that'll be pretty close. Wonderful. No real other adjustments needed from there. Good to go. All right, let's go back outside. We're going to use the same Karakia preset. It seems to be working quite well on Charlie's skin tone, as well as for slightly flat lighting, gives it a nice contrast. Adjust our exposure, white balance, and then go in and dodge the subject. Not much else needed there. All right, very different kind of photo. We definitely want a lot more color, a lot more contrast. So here we're going to be looking at the hider or El Viejo presets, which bring out a lot more out of the colors. Adjust our exposure, push our shadows a little bit. We want a little bit more detail, but we definitely don't need to see everything in the photo. And we might need just a little bit more contrast. Copy our settings, which are going to be the same for this image. And look at that, just one click, one paste, and things are pretty much where we want them. Just fine tune our settings. Fine tune our white balance. Now I'm playing around with the highlight slider just to see if it's worth it to bring back a little bit more detail in the lightsaber. But really not much to do there. Give it a little bit more contrast, a little more saturation. We're going to crop to center max. And that's it on this one. Now, if you're probably seeing some other photos that we're taking with the drone, we're going to save those for a separate segment only on those images. I hope you enjoyed this Lightroom tutorial, a little bit different from the wedding photos we've been editing in Photoshop, but very similar results that we're trying to achieve. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time on Editing Deconstructed.